Imagine sitting in a cozy art house theater, the screen flickering to life as the lush black and white world of classic Hollywood envelops the room. A statuesque silhouette appears, the features of a striking woman gradually illuminated. She moves with quiet grace, her expression charged with longing or despair. This is Greta Garbo, the Swedish-born, larger-than-life enigma who emerged from poverty, conquered silent films and talkies alike, then slipped away from the spotlight on her own terms. For anyone who loves film history or simply appreciates a riveting on-screen presence, Garbo remains a name both legendary and mysterious. Her story begins in Stockholm, Sweden, in a cramped, humble apartment occupied by her parents, Anna Lovisa and Carl Alfred Gustafsson, and their 3 children. It was a harsh life, filled with endless worries about money and groceries, and how to keep the cold at bay during the bitter Scandinavian winters. Born on September 18, 1905, Greta Lovisa Gustafsson, as she was known then, spent her early years in a world where laughter was rationed, resources were few, and the specter of illness loomed constantly. If you believe in the idea that adversity can forge a quiet sort of resolve, Greta might be the perfect illustration. She was introverted from the start, painfully shy, and uneasy with the structured environment of school. Even so, she loved to observe the world around her, storing away impressions in her mind, perhaps already practicing the art of acting without realizing it. The year 1919 brought tragedy. A wave of the Spanish flu ravaged Stockholm, and her father lost his job, then his health, eventually succumbing to the illness in 1920. These months of anguish left 14-year-old Greta with no choice but to abandon formal schooling so she could help keep the family afloat. Her mother's grief was tangible. The entire family was forced to reevaluate its future. As the youngest child, Greta felt a strong tug of duty. She accepted a job at the PUB department store, perched behind counters selling hats or gloves, sometimes modeling for their in-house newspaper ads. She was good at it. Her face drew attention, and her quiet grace stood out. These humble beginnings might seem a world away from the glamorous image the name Greta Garbo would one day evoke, but it was in those store ads that she first began to sense the power of the camera's gaze. An opportunity soon came by pure chance. A director of commercials spotted her and enlisted her to appear in a few short ads for women's clothing. The camera, it turned out, liked her understated presence. She needed no words to project a certain wistfulness or charm. A spark ignited. By the time she encountered comedy director Eric Arthur Petchler, who cast her in a small role for the film Luftfahrtpeter, she was no longer merely curious about acting. She was enthralled. Though her part was minor, the experience made the entire film set feel magical, and her performance, even in that small capacity, resonated with viewers. It was enough to get her thinking seriously about the craft. Her determination bore fruit in the form of a scholarship to the Royal Dramatic Theatre's acting school in Stockholm, an esteemed institution that had nurtured Swedish stage talents for years. At first, she was a quiet presence in the corridors, absorbing the fundamentals: vocal projection, emotional authenticity, movement, and the finer nuances of drama. She had a thick Swedish dialect that some might find unpolished, but she had an inner grace that made her compelling in front of the camera. While studying, she was cast in Enligmatic, also known as Only a Waiter, which allowed her to refine her skill set further. A turning point arrived when she met Maurice, the charismatic, influential Swedish film director, who'd later play a key role in shaping her future. Stiller recognized something extraordinary in the young actress, seeing beyond her shyness to a raw, expressive quality that needed only the right guidance. Around 1924, he cast her in the Saga of Gösta Berling, an adaptation of a novel by the Nobel Prize-winning author Selma Lagerlöf. Garbo's co-star, Lars Hansen, was a popular actor in Swedish cinema, but it was the newcomer's understated and soulful performance that drew a surprising amount of attention. Stiller wasn't just a director. He became Garbo's mentor, teacher, and friend. He showed her everything from refining her acting style to navigating the precarious film industry. He reined in her insecurities, cultivated her confidence, and convinced her that destiny lay beyond the borders of Sweden. The early 1920s was a time when Hollywood was fast becoming the global center of filmmaking. The major studios, MGM, Paramount, Fox, Warner Brothers, were churning out silent features, epic historical pieces, swashbuckling adventures, and lavish romantic dramas. Influential Swedish directors like Victor Sjöström, later known in the U.S. as Victor Seaström, had already tested the waters in America and found success. It was only a matter of time before Hollywood's scouting radar expanded, searching for fresh faces with a different look to captivate American audiences. Friendships and professional connections proved pivotal. Sjöström was in contact with Louis B. Mayer, one of the co-founders of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM. Meanwhile, Stiller took Garbo's film, Gösta Berling, to Berlin, hoping to show it around, generate interest, and possibly land a contract. Accounts differ on the exact sequence of events, but legend has it that after viewing Garbo's performance, Mayer was so impressed that he wanted to sign her. Initially, he'd had his eye on Stiller, hoping to bring the director to Hollywood, but as soon as Garbo became part of the equation, it was clear that she was the real prize. By 1925, the course of Greta Gustafsson's life was set. She was heading to America to see if she could carve out a place in one of the most competitive industries on the planet. Arriving in the United States was both thrilling and terrifying. She stepped off the boat not speaking much English, wearing modest clothing that reminded her how far she was from home. She waited in New York City for months with Stiller, anticipating the promised contact from MGM. Nothing came. The city's high energy also overwhelmed her. She was used to Swedish sensibilities and found the American pace jarring. After a while, the pair decided to relocate to Los Angeles, hoping face-to-face meetings would speed things along. Even then, the silence from MGM persisted for 5 weeks. Disillusioned, Garbo wrote letters to her boyfriend in Sweden, lamenting her sense of alienation and homesickness. She pictured returning to the familiarity of Sweden, where she understood the language and the culture, but fate intervened. A Swedish friend in Los Angeles reached out to Irving Thalberg, MGM's brilliant boy wonder producer, who was known for shaping star images and overseeing major productions. Thalberg arranged a screen test for Garbo, an audition of sorts, to see how she'd come across under studio conditions. The result was electrifying. Though she'd barely spoken English, her face conveyed volumes without dialogue. Thalberg saw the potential instantly. He also noticed that she was heavier than the typical Hollywood starlet, so he recommended she shed some weight. Then he set up English lessons to prepare her for a future that would inevitably lead to talking pictures. In 1926, Garbo finally made her Hollywood debut in Torrent, a silent film directed by Montabelle, and critics took notice, praising her deep, naturalistic approach to emotion. Over the next few years, Garbo racked up a string of silent film successes. Among them was The Temptress, in which she received top billing, confirmation that MGM believed they had found a new star. Garbo wasn't entirely happy with the sophisticated, often glamorous roles Thalberg chose for her, insisting that these parts didn't align with her self-image. But the screen persona stuck, and the public devoured it. She was the magnetic femme fatale, or the worldly aristocrat, or the seductress harboring a tragic secret. Audiences loved the tension, the romantic longing, the luminous close-ups. As her stardom soared, she developed a reputation for wanting privacy. She disliked open sets, demanded black screens for certain scenes, so only essential personnel could watch her perform, and rarely granted interviews. This fed an aura of mystique that, far from alienating people, fascinated them even more. When pressed about these unusual requests, she explained that her face did things she could not control if others were watching. For an actress so skilled at subtle shifts in expression, it seemed almost logical. Any distraction could disrupt that delicate alchemy. Perhaps the biggest pivot in her life came with the transition to sound cinema. Hollywood was abuzz in the late 1920s, uncertain whether talkies were a passing novelty or an unstoppable trend. Many silent film stars saw their careers evaporate once they had to speak lines, whether due to thick accents, squeaky voices, or difficulties adjusting to microphone technology. MGM executives fretted that Garbo's accent might not translate well to American audiences. They hesitated to cast her in a sound film. But in 1930, the studio gambled on Anna Christie, an adaptation of Eugene O'Neill's play about a former prostitute who tries to restart her life. MGM advertised it with the now famous tagline, "Garbo Talks." People flocked to theaters, enthralled to hear the melancholic, smoky timbre of her voice. Anna Christie shattered box office records and earned Garbo an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. Critics declared that her accent added to her allure rather than subtracting from it. She was no longer just a silent phenomenon. She was a full-fledged movie star of the new era. From there, her sound film career took off. While Romance, 1930, and Inspiration, 1931, didn't match the towering success of Anna Christie, Garbo demonstrated she could handle a range of characters, from conflicted lovers to cunning spies. In Mata Hari, 1931, she played the exotic dancer and German spy in a story loosely inspired by real-life events. Her performance was mesmerizing, blending vulnerability with danger. She then starred in Grand Hotel, 1932, as a fragile Russian ballerina who yearns for a better life. Grand Hotel won the Academy Award for Best Picture, further cementing Garbo's position as one of MGM's top moneymakers. Another widely publicized remark called her the greatest money-making machine ever put on screen. An exaggeration, perhaps, but it reflected how her name alone could carry a film to commercial triumph. As her contract with MGM neared its end, Garbo took a brief hiatus in Sweden. Studio negotiations ensued, and she returned to the U.S. in 1933 to film Queen Christina. This historical drama, loosely based on the 17th century Swedish monarch, was notable for multiple reasons. It featured John Gilbert, her old silent-era co-star, whose career had waned, and it explored the Queen's unconventional romantic entanglements. Garbo insisted that Gilbert appear with her, trusting in their previous on-screen chemistry. The studio balked at first, worried about Gilbert's diminishing box office draw, but eventually relented. The movie soared, becoming that year's top MGM grosser and proving Garbo's instincts right. Her next milestone was Anna Karenina, 1935, an adaptation of Leo Tolstoy's novel about an aristocratic woman who dares to seek passion despite societal constraints. Many fans and critics consider it among her finest performances. In 1936, she starred in Camille, directed by George Cukor, based on the Dumas story of a courtesan who falls tragically in love. Filming proved difficult. Irving Thalberg had recently died, shocking Garbo, who'd become close to the visionary producer. Her other dear friend, and earlier co-star John Gilbert, had also died that year. In the midst of this personal and professional turmoil, Garbo channeled her grief into a portrayal of delicate heartbreak that critics and audiences adored. She walked away with the New York Film Critics Circle Award for Best Actress and an Oscar nomination, reinforcing her star power yet again. But there was a flip side to her fame. Garbo loathed the publicity machine of Hollywood. She refused to do meet and greets on set, seldom gave interviews, and never turned up for Oscar ceremonies. She famously avoided signing autographs or engaging in promotional tours. She wanted to act, then retreat into her own world. No red carpets, no invasive journalists asking about her love life or her personal philosophies. In an environment that craved gossip and photo shoots, her reclusive nature became a legend unto itself. "I want to be alone," she once famously said, fueling countless parodies and quotes. She insisted it wasn't a flippant catchphrase, but a genuine preference for solitude. By the early 1940s, the Hollywood landscape was shifting. The Great Depression had given way to the war economy, and studios were rethinking their star rosters. Garbo began rejecting roles, either because she disliked the scripts or because she felt burnt out by the system. According to her Swedish biographer Sven Broman, Garbo openly stated that she was tired of Hollywood, tired of forcing herself to go into the studio when her heart wasn't in it anymore. Despite occasional rumors about other potential projects, she never found a new contract that suited her sense of artistic freedom. Her final film turned out to be Two-Faced Woman, 1941, a comedy that didn't resonate with audiences the way her previous dramatic roles had. After it underperformed, she stepped back from acting altogether. Although she was still relatively young, in her mid-30s, Garbo made no formal announcements about retirement. She simply slipped away from the industry. Over time, fans realized she wasn't coming back. She settled primarily in New York City, living in an apartment on the east side of Manhattan, sometimes seen strolling the streets in large sunglasses and casual clothing, almost as if challenging passers-by to recognize the face once heralded as the ultimate movie star. She never married, despite rumors linking her to actors and even to possible same-sex relationships. There was always a swirl of speculation around her personal life, but in typical Garbo fashion, she never confirmed anything. She navigated her later decades in quiet independence, traveling occasionally, reading voraciously, collecting art, and meeting friends in private. As the decades rolled on, the screen legend receded further into anonymity. Younger generations grew up hearing the name Greta Garbo, used almost as shorthand for someone elusive and private. She had become iconic for both her cinematic achievements and her retreat from the world of glitz and glam. Occasional paparazzi snapshots would surface in tabloids, but she led a calm, low-key existence, often walking local parks or slipping into museums. Then, in 1990, at the age of 84, Garbo died in a New York hospital from pneumonia and renal failure. The obituaries poured in, extolling the brilliance of her silent films, her haunting dialogue in the talkies, and the resolute dignity with which she had conducted her life. She left behind no children, no spouse, and a legacy as intangible and enduring as the flicker of light on a movie screen. So why does Greta Garbo's name still evoke fascination decades after her final bow? Perhaps because she embodies a tension between cinematic vulnerability and personal secrecy. Watch her in Flesh and the Devil. See how she gazes at John Gilbert, how her eyes convey desire and heartbreak. Or watch Camille, where her fragility becomes almost painful to witness. She made heartbreak universal, and for that reason, her silent and early sound pictures remain timeless for those who appreciate old Hollywood's spell. Her accent, her hushed line deliveries, her ephemeral approach to stardom, these add up to a portrait of someone who existed on a different plane than many of her peers. She also represents a bridge between the silent and sound eras, a transition that destroyed many careers. Garbo thrived on both sides of that divide, adapting quickly to new technology despite language barriers and studio doubts. She took creative control when she could, insisted on reuniting with old collaborators, and demanded privacy when the entire system was designed to exploit every morsel of personal detail. She championed a sense of individuality that still resonates in an age where celebrities often clamor for attention on social media. Her personal quirks, refusing to sign autographs, ignoring red carpets, turning down interview requests, helped craft the Garbo mystique. The film historian Kevin Brownlow once said that her performance in Flesh and the Devil was more erotic than anything Hollywood had produced up to that time. She was provocative without being overtly vulgar, using subtle gestures and facial shifts to communicate grand passions. That delicacy can seem all the more powerful today when special effects or explicit scenes often overshadow the quieter nuances of performance. The heartbreak that punctuated her life, her father's early death, her sense of alienation in America, the losses of Irving Thalberg and John Gilbert, seems to have colored her worldview. Whether or not she consciously drew upon these experiences for her film roles, it's hard not to see how they might have shaped her screen presence. There's a poetic sadness to so many of her characters, a longing for connection even when the narrative ensures doom. In some ways, that melancholy is what made her so compelling. Audiences saw a woman who wasn't playing at heartbreak. She was heartbreak incarnate in a cinematic sense. If you're wondering which of her roles to watch first, you can't go wrong with Anna Christie, her triumphant talkie debut, or Grand Hotel, a multi-character drama where she's a dancer entangled in the hopes and despairs of strangers. If you prefer epic romance, Anna Karenina might be your jam, with Garbo radiating conflicted passion. For an even earlier glimpse, watch The Saga of Gösta Berling, her first major role, or Flesh and the Devil, which soared at the box office thanks to her and Gilbert's white-hot chemistry. And if you're in the mood for something that merges style with deep emotion, Camille stands as perhaps her most heartbreakingly beautiful performance. Her funeral was private. By the time she passed, she had become almost a mythical figure, someone who was once the greatest star in Hollywood, but had opted to vanish rather than fade in public. The media coverage of her death was reverent, acknowledging the mark she left on film history. She might not have sought out tributes, but she received them nonetheless. In the modern era, her influence persists. Dozens of actors have cited her as an inspiration, whether for her subtle comedic timing in Ninochka, one of her few comedic ventures, or her radiant close-ups that remain study material for cinematographers. Her reluctance to engage with fame presaged the modern phenomenon of celebrities wanting to separate personal from professional life. What's your favorite Greta Garbo film? Is it one of her moody, silent pictures that feel like stepping into a dream? Or do you prefer the lush talkies, where her voice imbued the dialogue with a quiet intensity? Let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't explored her work, you might be in for a treat. Her performances capture an era of Hollywood filmmaking that vibrates with romantic energy, artistry, and a kind of haunting sadness that feels human and timeless. In recounting her life, it's easy to see a narrative arc that feels like a classic Hollywood script. A girl from poverty rises to stardom, battles with the system, becomes a global icon, and then walks away before the system can devour her. It's a story that resonates because it's about integrity, about an artist who understood her worth and refused to cheapen it for headlines or glamour shoots. And though she lived much of her adult life in near seclusion, glimpses of her strolling through Manhattan or traveling incognito to Europe sustained the mystique. We can only wonder how Garbo might have navigated the 21st century. Would she have found an outlet on streaming platforms or indie films? Would she have joined social media or scorned it completely? Perhaps she would have continued to do exactly as she did, appear in the medium she loved on her own terms, and then quietly depart, leaving the audience wanting more. That's the legacy she left behind: brilliance, mystery, and a silent invitation to discover or rediscover her work. If you've got your own favorite Garbo moment, maybe a specific scene where her eyes brim with tears or a witty line from one of her rare comedies, drop it in the comments. And if you're discovering her for the very first time, get ready to explore a filmography that defined an era. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into Hollywood's golden age. It's a testament to Garbo's resonance that even now, decades after she receded from the public eye, we still talk about her as though she never left. Her iconic roles remain as vivid as ever, reminding us that true star power transcends time, technology, and even the artist's own desire to vanish.